My favorite time. family, and she's traveling now, so our thoughts and prayers are definitely with her. But she did send me her talking points, so I will be Colleen. I will deliver her message, and but right now I'm going to get out of the way and let our presenters introduce themselves, and we can get started. So, Mr. Paul James.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Everybody seems so serious, but that's a good thing. Oftentimes when we're talking about diversity and inclusive excellence, we're not serious enough. So I come to you this afternoon with a bit of humor. Let me just say a little bit about what I do at Duke University. I've been here now for approximately 5 years. I'm one of the persons at Duke who has the good fortune, some might say, of working both on the university side and on the healthcare side. The Office for Institutional Equity, we work across both terrains, and the primary goal is to bring about equity, diversity, inclusion, education, compliance, Title IX, I'll stop there, to the entire Duke University community. I think it's important for me to acknowledge Dr. Bryant's presence and being on the podium with her. Thank you very much for the invitation. Speaking of the invitation, one of the things that we know that makes diversity work profoundly good when it's clicking on all cylinders is when we have persons who understand how to cross-fertilize and boundary span. So just the fact that you have me here representing OIE, you have the university side represented, we're situated in the healthcare system, speaks volumes to the fact and to the reality that when you have people crossing boundaries around diversity, learning occurs very differently because we occupy different spaces. And when you occupy different spaces with respect to diversity, you're more likely to stretch your mind and stretch your thinking. So I just want to acknowledge that in you and those who put this presentation together. I will talk momentarily about resource groups, constituent groups, affinities, etc. But let me say first, what I've also been asked to speak about is last fall, Dr. Ben Reese, Vice President for the Office for Institutional Equity, asked Rhonda Brandon and myself to co-chair a group that would look at creating a statement around what the university means by diversity and its commitment. Very important. We decided to move forward with this endeavor because, if you can imagine, over 35,000 employees here, depending on what department you go in, you're going to get a different term or different meaning of diversity. So in an effort to streamline that, we in fact created an umbrella definition that was agreed upon by the Board of Trustees. And while it doesn't eliminate your ability to create your own based on your department, it can certainly serve as a guide. It is all of 10 lines, so we spent more than 4 months on 10 lines, but that's how higher ed works. Sorry about that. But we pulled together faculty, staff, and students and created ways to think about diversity such that no matter where you rest at Duke University and the Duke University health system, if and when you see the definition, you can find a home in that definition. So by nature, one doesn't create a definition that excludes people, right? Or else, we're the wrong people to be doing the work. But let me read this because I think it's critically important, and it's also critically important as we think about the formation of identity or resource groups, both here and beyond. Duke aspires to create a community built on collaboration, innovation, creativity, and belonging. Our collective success depends on the robust exchange of ideas, an exchange that is best when the rich diversity of our perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences flourish. To achieve this exchange, it is essential that all members of the community feel secure, welcome, that the contributions of all individuals are respected, and that all voices are heard. All members of our community have a responsibility to uphold these values. Now, there will be areas in which we fall short, but the second word in this framework is aspires, okay? We wanted to give it a feeling and a core sense that we have come from a long way, but we have a long way to go. In fact, I say it like this, because we are a democracy, and because we are, my opinion, because we are democracy unfolding, no one has arrived. And so in creating a definition or a commitment statement like this, it gives each and every one of you an opportunity to read it and jump on the Ferris wheel where you're most comfortable, right? As opposed to thinking that everybody has to get into this diversity conversation and magically be at the same place. It doesn't work like that, colleagues, because we have different journeys, different experiences. Now let me say this. Unless you came from Mars, which I'm not seeing any Martians, one cannot be neutral in the space of diversity and inclusion. Why do I say that? Because you bring a culture, you bring an awareness, you bring a background, you bring a sense of self, correct? Correct? So that means that you can't be neutral in the space of difference. There's some things that you notice about me. Some of you may notice that I have a Midwestern flat accent as opposed to a deep Southern accent. Okay? Can't be neutral to that. Doesn't mean I'm at a deficit because I'm from the Midwest. Right? Right? Okay. But it means that you might notice that. Some of you might notice that I'm male. Okay? Some of you might notice that I'm a black male. Right? So to be neutral works against the counterintuitive nature, or works against the intuitive nature of difference. Right? Now, we ask you to give up the neutrality in this because there's always somebody in the space of diversity who say things like this. It doesn't matter, I've never seen you that way. Well, we now know through the world of social psychology that within a quarter of a second of seeing someone, you make a decision on what race you think they are. Am I making sense? Now, you may be wrong about the race, but you make a decision. Or what somebody's gender, or about someone's class, or if somebody has military background, or if somebody is from the South, or from California, or from a different country, correct? All right. And so this definition is something that, we hope, and Rhonda, who's the Chief Human Resources Officer for all of Duke Health, hope that the entire institution will begin to buy into, and we're helping individuals and departments realize that aim and that goal. Okay, so let me conclude by talking about two other things I think are very important. So I've been in this diversity space now for 20 years, okay? All of my experience has been in higher education. And so the evolution of what we mean by diversity has changed. The words have changed over the years, right? So at one time we were using the term multicultural. Okay, at one time we were using, the word diversity is pretty much on its way out because now we're using intercultural. And just when we get to intercultural, now we're talking about creating a sense of belonging, right? And then you have those of us in this room who are old enough to conjoin all those to make sense out of what people are saying, okay? So we're in this space now of thinking about when a room or when a department is sufficiently diverse. But not just sufficiently diverse, colleagues, but amongst that diversity, how do people feel like they in fact belong? Okay? So if this room was completely equitable, I'm just going to throw out some terms here. If there were 20 people in this room right now, and you had 5 Asians, right? You had 5 quote-unquote blacks. You had 5 quote-unquote whites, 5 quote-unquote whatever, and it was particularly broken down in such a way that we could generically say, wow, this is equitable. Are you with me? Then you ask one of the 20, how do you feel like you belong? wow, I don't. Are you with me? So we can be in a space of equity, right? Doesn't mean we've created the context by where people feel like they're in a space that's based on decency, respect, and a sense of belonging, right? And so that's where I am in this space at Duke University and Duke University Health. How we give the community a sense that no matter who you are when you enter into the room, those dimensions don't define you. Rather, it's how we create a space of authentic conversation and belonging, which is a perfect segue to resource groups and constituent groups and identity groups. You see, I'm just throwing out some of the names. It's national, how these groups are labeled. I think that it is a sign of a healthy organization that you can get to a point to where your diversity strategic planning, organizing is such that individuals within that group can emerge, or leaders within that group can emerge and say, okay, wow, because I am in fact A, I think it would be really neat to create an identity group or constituent group that allows me to learn more and engage around that specific dimension. Does not mean that that one dimension defines me, correct? But in the workspace, I want to create a sense of sameness around either a faith, let me just throw out some, a race, a gender, a sexual identity, orientation or expression, etc. That's the sign of a healthy organization. Now, we don't create these groups to create isolation. We create groups such as this to better inform both the persons in those groups and the persons who want to know more about what it means to be in the workspace and live with that particular identity. Very important. Now, it's not to say that if an organization cannot find the room in the space to create resource groups, that it's fundamentally behind the curve. It's just saying that something is working in a community when you can develop the capacity to do resourcing around people who have a similar background, beliefs, and or traits. But one must be very careful in setting up those, because although I may find myself within my own identity, I may want to come and learn and explore more about your identity, plural, or identities, and learn more. So it becomes very important to the leadership to when we choose to go down this road, to do so from a standpoint of equality and not necessarily social or cultural isolation. The key to resource groups and identity groups is not necessarily formation, but sustainability. It's how you both create but sustain a workforce that has enough opportunity to fill an identity group or a series of identity groups. But nevertheless, very, 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 very important. So, my outro is this. None of you in this room, in my humble opinion, exist on one plane, right? So, for example, you might be an aunt. You might be a parent. You might be the sole breadwinner in your household. You might be taking care of an elderly parent and or a family member, right? You might be really, really, really wealthy sitting in this space. Or you may not be wealthy sitting in this place. You may consider yourself one or two or three or four different ethnic identities and or races, okay? And so the beauty of resource groups, it allows people to function on multiple planes, to recognize those planes, but to also, when you have an opportunity, to dig deeper into a particular dimension, so on and so forth. Now, what could be better than that? After all, we are in a country that has a belief that it is the expression of identities that make us better in some kind of way. I'll close there and look forward to the group dialogue that we'll have. Thank you.
I told Gina that I better go next. I feel like my old lady limp is going to get a little worse if I sit there too long. So, first of all, again, Gina, thank you so much for inviting me, DCRI. Thank you so much for inviting us this afternoon. This is a really very exciting opportunity, and I actually didn't realize until Gina called me. I didn't know what a resource group was. I didn't know what an employee resource group was. I didn't know what a business resource group was. So DCRI has given me the opportunity to learn and then really think about that. Actually, at our counseling center over on the university side, we are engaged in a process where we have affinity groups. So I was beginning to do a little bit of research. I'm a lifelong learner and really see some of the similarities and differences. So thank you so much for the invitation. Because my time is limited, I had remarks that are a little bit more prepared, so I'll do a little bit more reading. But by way of background, again, my name is Anita Yvonne Bryant. Folks around the way call me AY. I've been at the counseling center over on the university side for 23 years. I can't believe that. That's a little bit difficult. And I really started over at the counseling center, of course, as a psychologist, seeing undergraduate and graduate professional students, but started off as their coordinator of multicultural services, and then have moved in an associate director role and really focus on the training of our emerging psychologists and our emerging clinical social workers and psychiatry residents. So I still do practice, but I have an administrative function as well. And Gina really asked me to talk on the resource group. I'm going to try to get my language. I may bumble and fumble. I apologize. But really asked me to talk to the resource group that's focusing on African and African Americans, employees of African and African American descent. So that's kind of the context for my remark. Paul, you set me up so beautifully in terms of talking about the differences and the different reasons why we come in and out of resource groups, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. But I think in terms of my remarks, there are really three hopes that I would like to share with you this afternoon. And I want to start out, how many of you all have seen the movie The Queen of Katwe? I actually had the opportunity to see it a couple of weekends ago. And there's a scene in the movie, in the Queen of Katwe, where a chess coach, who's played by David Oyelowo, has to ignite a fire under his team. They are competing against players with significant advantage and privilege. And he shares this tale, and as I looked into this tale, I realized it was actually an adapted Aesop's fable. So one morning, there was a crusty old dog, and this dog was really hungry. And the dog was searching for his next meal. He spied a cat and chased it down the alley, and chased it through a puddle and into a house, and even jumped over an open fire. But then the cat was gone, and the dog collapsed on the floor. The coach said to the dog, "Well, what happened? You were so hungry, and your dinner, it ran away." And then the dog said, speaking to the coach, "The problem is, I was only running for a meal. The cat, that cat was running for his life." And then the coach goes on to explain to his team that for some, things come easy. That hunger, although uncomfortable for the dog, was only one missed meal. But for others, the journey is difficult, and each step may be a step for your life. So this fable, as we think about the context of resource groups and why we get involved in resource groups and who participates and whether or not you want to participate, the fable really helped me understand my own learning and challenges as a staff member and associate director as I participate in my own agency's group. As associate director, we have a diversity engagement project, and I've really found this as a helpful framework to understand that as I got into this group, kind of what were the sources of my inspiration, and getting into a resource group or an affinity group as we call them, what might be my sources of frustration. So I want to talk a little bit about those things. Second, this fable speaks the unexamined values and motivations we bring into our resource groups. Our values and motivations may change over time, but it's important to know those differences and how they influence our process of engagement and organizational transformation. These differences are going to occur both within the group of employees from Black and African descent and between group members from other groups. So my first hope for you as you participate in these groups is to have a conversation, and have a conversation often. Know that some of the members in this group will participate because their connection with others is what is going to bring energy to their work. Others will be participating because they're seeking mentorship and professional growth. Others may participate because they experience the climate as hostile and they're discouraged. They may not be able to leave because they're the family breadwinner. They might be saving for college. They might be sending money to relatives. Another coworker may participate because they've received some difficult feedback about their biases and wanting to learn more. Others of you might want to share your talents and your gifts with this particular group. Some of your coworkers will be motivated by altruism, faith, or a moral compass that points to doing the right thing. But the thing that's really important here is to understand your motivation for joining a resource group, learn the motivation of others, and remain open to the fact that some of your group members need to just find their next meal, while other of your group members might be running for their lives. My second hope for you, and it's really a hope that's specifically for employees of African and African American descent. I really hope that you recognize that you have been here and you have done this work before. We have done this work before, and we've done it with astounding successes and some disappointing setbacks. DCRI may call it an ERG or a BRG, mental health and human service professionals, we call them affinity groups. But no matter what we label them, as African Americans, we already know how to do this work. In Durham's history, for example, or as I like to say, kind of back in the day, this work was done in charrettes. You know, I'm thinking about and remembering the work of Ann Atwater and C.P. Ellis co-leading a charrette in 1971 to desegregate the schools here in Durham. We do this work of organizational innovation and growth in our PTA meetings. We do it in our church meetings. We do it in our deacon boards. We do it in our chapter meetings. We do it in our athletic leagues. And we do this work in our community service organizations. So in some ways, I might be taking a privilege here, but in some ways, I would argue that within our community, we've actually written the manual on widening the talent pipeline, advancing the development of people in our organizations, and cultivating strategic partnerships. We may have been focused on different outcomes, but actually the processes are very, very similar. So as my Mama May used to say, there ain't nothing new under the sun here. My second hope today is that you seize this opportunity, not to begin, but to continue our legacy of innovation and change here where you work. And my third and final hope for you is that you, as you join your group, or as you're considering joining a group, is that your group set an intention of accountability. Accountability to each other, and DCRI's accountability to you as a group. And here are some questions that I would just invite you to consider. In your group, what are some of the outcomes that you hope to achieve? What are the areas that you want to positively impact in this organization? Based on your experiences, what are the best practices to be able to move this work forward? How can you work with the other resource groups to achieve your goals? What is DCRI, as we talk about the big DCRI, what is DCRI bringing to the table to assist you in achieving your goals? How do all members of your group learn the knowledge and the skills related to your diverse backgrounds? What are some of the unique cultural contributions that you bring to the table to move DCRI forward? And what level of organizational impact is expected not only from your group, but expected from DCRI? As you set your intention for your resource group with accountability, please recognize that any work that we do that's truly done for the greater good will always contain 1 part grace, 1 part resistance, 1 part compassion, 1 part success, 1 part decay, and 1 part growth. And as members committed to participating in this process, we all have a responsibility to maintain the balance between all of these parts. So I am really, again, happy to be here. I'm really, really looking forward to hearing about the work that you're doing. And I'm really, really wishing you so much success as you move forward for a better DCRI.
Hello, everyone. I'm Colleen. No. As I said, some of you got here late. Colleen Scott isn't able to be here. She had a death in the family, but she was so gracious in sending me her talking points. And I'm glad that I get to follow these too, because there's a lot of overlap in what's being said, and this will help you understand that all of these groups can, as you both said, work together. You can learn from each other and grow together and help the DCRI be a great place to work. It already is, but even better, a workplace to celebrate. So I'm going to just read verbatim just exactly what she has here. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Colleen Scott, and I work with the Baldwin Scholars Program, which is an undergraduate women's leadership program on campus. I've been at Duke since 1998 with Baldwin since 2004. Gina asked me to address why a women's employee resource group would be important within the DCRI. Let me start with some information. Regardless of age, background, or educational attainment, a wage gap exists between men's and women's median annual earnings. Women earn between 54 to 85% of men's salaries for the same job. Over a 40-year career, this gap will cause women to lose an average of $431,000. One of my students translated this number to equate to a house, or over 61,000 Chipotle burrito bowls without guacamole. Women occupy fewer than 20% of corporate board seats, with 80% of those seats claimed by white women. That number sinks to 3.7% in Fortune 500 companies. In a recent Pew survey of millennial mothers, 58% said that becoming a mother made it more difficult to get ahead in their careers compared to 19% of millennial fathers. In the workplace, women report having to provide more evidence of competence than others to prove themselves. That colleagues have suggested working fewer hours after having children, and that at work they find themselves pressured to play stereotypical feminine roles. There are some very real structural inequities related to privilege, and counter those realities with the research that more diverse groups of people solving problems lead to more innovative solutions. You hear that from our leadership in town hall and other places all the time, so nailed it, you all. The presence of many women at top levels of leadership and management can help to solve some of society's toughest problems. The other piece of this is that the workplace is changing. Most people no longer want to come to work, complete their tasks, and go home. Employees want to be valued for who they are and know that they are contributing meaningful work to the organization. We want our organization to invest in our growth and our development. I heard a story in the fall about how women on President Obama's staff colluded in meetings to amplify each other's voices. Initially, they found their ideas were either man-interrupted or a man would take credit for their ideas. The women started repeating each other's comments and crediting the appropriate women. The result was that Obama started calling on and consulting more women. Listen, ladies, no. As a community, the DCRI can create an environment where women's initiatives are noticed, valued, and rewarded, where women's voices are heard. Before you jump in with the game plan for this organization, I encourage you to conduct an assessment of the issues that are relevant within the DCRI, then design your intervention strategy to tackle these findings. You can accomplish your goals in many ways, and here's a few she names: hosting professional development events, developing a mentoring network, teaching leadership skills, offering support groups, and team building. And those of you in the room who are familiar with Pride, and I know Sarah's a member there, this is really something that is, I mean, it works. It just works. We've talked about it, and it's just wonderful that all of these groups will be able to do this. Depending on what you need, what your needs are, your activities could look like offering a speaker on work-life balance, reading an article and hosting a discussion on imposter syndrome, and that's the phenomenon where high-achieving women live with a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. And she adds a short aside here. When I was initially asked to participate on this panel, my first reaction was to silently curse AY, who recommended me. My second reaction was to decline because I am not an expert on these issues, when in fact I have years and years of experience. Hiring a public speaking coach to give individual feedback, that's another suggestion she has. Hosting a training session on negotiation skills and asking for what you want, and creating a website or Facebook page where members can share relevant articles. This should not feel like a chore or additional work assignment, but like an investment in yourself, in your peers, and in your organization. A final few notes here. 1, there is room in this employee resource group for everyone. The big picture thinkers who have the ideas and the worker bees that make things happen. 2, intersectionality. Women's experiences are not the same across race, sexuality, age, ability, and socioeconomic status. Allow space for these nuances to exist and to be recognized. 3, leadership and managers have a critical role in setting these employee resource groups up for success. It's a win-win scenario when staff feel supported, visible, and relevant to the mission of the organization. 4, the quickest way to kill an initiative like this is to introduce or encourage a sense of competition between women. Our greatest power is as a collective. In short, a women's employees resource group at DCRI can not only identify, cultivate, and literally promote talented women, but propel DCRI to excellence. Didn't I do a great job as Colleen? No, Colleen was really wonderful, and all of these, as I said, they all overlap. But before I say anything else, I want to thank Colleen and AY and Paul, and then we're going to do some Q&A. But let's thank them, please. And as I said, the groups will be open to everyone. Look on Paul's for information about them. Paul's going to talk a little bit more about the intergenerational, and we're all just going to get your questions. So I'm going to get out of the way, and unless you want me to be Colleen again, but I'll get out of the way.
So is it Q&A time, or do you want me to expound on something?
It can be both.
Okay, yeah, let's, you want to go together and do a Q&A, or you want to sit, or what I do? Okay, let's work around sort of the national picture and the usefulness and relevance. Then we drill down with wonderful metaphors, and with African Americans and with women. Let's open this up for any questions, any thoughts, and to the best of our ability, we will chime in. We were this good.
Drop the mic.
Drop the mic. There's no question that's out of bounds here, folks.
Are you guys planning to open up, or maybe will DCRI open up resource groups for just lots of different things? Is this something we plan to expand into the future?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I can actually answer that question really well. Yes, we're going to look at other groups. In fact, I'm already laying the foundation. If you've seen the announcement on Pulse, it was posted today for our Cultural Heritage observance for May, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. That will be the next group that's set up, and I'm talking with some of our Indian staff about setting up a group. So yes, it will expand. We have Pride in place for our LGBTQ staff, so the answer, yes. Seth?
I'm happy to hear that DCRI is going to have these groups. Did I miss where maybe Big Duke's going to do this, and the medical? Everyone's going to have groups, or is this just a DCRI?
No, it seems to me that this community is taking the lead and maybe piloting this. So let me say I'm all over Duke Health. Thank you. He's the man. Let me say I'm all over Duke Health, and this is maybe the first time in which I've seen this model emerging. Now, we do have a plethora of diversity committees that come together and do diversity work in lots of different ways. But the fact that this organization is considering drilling down one more level and daring to do affinity or resource groups, I think is very interesting and very fun. I will say this, that it should be quality over quantity. If you decide that you're going to go down the road of 1 or 2 or 3 groups, or even to enhance an existing one, I do so with a lens toward quality and authenticity. One of the things that I neglected to say in my introduction was oftentimes what stalls these kinds of organizations is that when people perceive that they aren't real, okay, for whatever reason, all right? So authenticity works, authenticity works, authenticity works.
Thank you for that. I participated, as Gina mentioned a moment ago, in the Pride group, and I think that it's been really successful in large part because Gina did the hard work of getting us all together and keeping us organized in the life. But there's a core group of people who come once a month for an hour and a half, and they show up every month, and they show up as themselves, willing to be exposed and willing, in a conversation.
Sure.
By exposed, I mean like genuine and authentic,
Yeah.
and are willing to share.
Yeah.
And it's a safe space for people to
Yeah.
come. And it would not continue without that core group of people who really feel passionately about it, the need for it to exist. And so, I do have a question. If you have other advice, I mean, with the authenticity piece really resonates for me, but if you have other advice on how we can kind of keep the fire going, because we've all got busy lives, we've got a lot going on at work, and an hour, in the case of Pride, an hour and a half once a month is not an insignificant investment in time and energy. And so I want all of these to be successful, and I look forward to participating in as many of them as I can. Wants to do that. So, do you have advice on how we can keep that momentum, that energy up, so that people do feel like they're worth coming to?
I want to be respectful. Are you directing that to me or to her or to both?
I both.
Okay.
All. Anybody else in the room has ideas?
So I think, to me, there's a compelling business case for this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That may fly below the radar, and that's this. One of the things when Ben Reese and others in the department, when we do coaching, executive coaching around hiring, we often have to remind managers and leaders and executive leaders how important the dimension of interpersonal skill sets are. You'd be amazed at, in my opinion only here, how many folks come on board and who are knocking home runs out in the space of hard skills, quote unquote, but in those qualitative skills around interpersonalness. Okay? Now, resource groups, if done properly, can be a profound business case to give all employees an opportunity to enter in and out of different communities and learn interpersonally, particularly around reflecting, around listening, and around sharing from the standpoint of making the mission and the organization better. Interpersonal skills, I think too often we take them for granted, but an individual that has the ability to go in and out of cultures and reflect, engage, share, and listen, that's a phenomenal individual in the 21st century.
I think, as I think about your question, and I as I said, as I was going through this process, I realized, we're actually doing, something similar at the counseling center. It's within a larger initiative on an anti-racism project that we're working on. And, I won't speak collectively for our caucus, but what I realize has been very, very helpful for us is that finding that sweet spot, that magic in between connection and being task focused. And so we were working on a task this morning, and we had our director in there with us, and we were kind of focused on the task. And the energy is just very, very different when we're focused on a task. We're not a big organization, 35 staff members, but when you think about a really large organization, the way that resource groups can sustain themselves is because you really feel like you have hands-on and having a direct impact where you work. So for us, it was just really finding that balance of checking in, how are you doing, how are things going with this, how are you feeling about that staff meeting, do you have any reactions, and if we're going to develop a hiring strategic plan, what are the points that we want to make, what are our goals? And so that's, those are just some suggestions that are a little closer to home. Those things have been helpful for us. Mm-hmm.
Can I go back to when you made the interpersonal skills? So interestingly enough, we had a discussion this morning with Nicole Hedrick, our head of HR, and it was on exactly that thing, is interpersonal skills, which I don't think some of our people, our hiring managers, are actually looking for when they interview. It's really important that we can get people that can talk to people, that feel comfortable moving in and out of different spaces. Miss Gina is a prime example example, somebody I know that can move in and out of any space. And I think we really need to encourage that more. I think my problem is going to be a bit like Sarah's. It's like, okay, many of these groups can actually go into and actually, you know, support and help. I just think we have to be more cognizant that we foster that environment, because at the moment I don't think we're that great at it. And I think if we foster that environment and have the right people that are motivated, then I think we'll find that people will come back to make things. The Pride groups are a classic example. That group are doing a phenomenal job. They have put a film out that I've fortunately seen 4 times now with different groups, with each town hall. And the response was absolutely phenomenal. I think if you can get that kind of passion and just letting people know what's out there, I think you'll have great success in any of these groups you set up. I just think it's having the right people, the right motivation, and I think we've started that really well, and I'd love to see these other groups do the same thing.
My initial thought on what you're saying, and I do believe ideally we want to be able to hire folks that have those interpersonal skills. I think in my role as a training director, and when I look at our psychology interns, let's say when they come in and when they leave, for me, what's even more exciting and really is a challenge is creating the environment and the space. And I think that the resource groups, again, that's another wonderful example of creating a space where we can learn those interpersonal skills with each other. You know, again, just kind of going back to some of our meetings and thinking about our style of communicating with each other and how that's different when we work in our staff meeting, and how that might be different if we're talking strategy or if we're wanting to make a particular point. So I would really see kind of a both and, clearly looking for that talent and folks that can kind of lead in that training and development, but really using these groups as a place where you can take risk and learn those skills. And I can say, ooh, I said that didn't really sound right, let me try again. And I'm with people, they're going to extend grace, that there's not going to be judgment. Then that skill is really going to stay with me and kind of deepen. So that's just kind of my initial thought on that.
I totally agree. I think Sarah mentioned about having safe spaces. And certainly from the Pride group, I'm seeing some people that hierarchical, you know, they might not be in a position that they can influence people or influence their groups, but they have a voice there. And it's amazing to see those people come out, I think, because you're giving them that platform. And they do feel, I don't want to speak to the exec team or even my own functional group, but in a group of people that have a similar mindset to me, I feel that I've got a voice. So I completely agree. I think that's really important. And I love seeing that. I love seeing people that you don't normally, you know, you can speak to them, but you've got to kind of pull them out. But if you go into a place where they feel that they can sit and they can comment and they're not going to be judged, and
Right.
they're not going to,
Right.
this
Right.
is so important, that the judgment piece to me is huge. So
What-
I completely agree. That's a great point.
What you're saying is I think fundamental to the authentic piece. One of the things that we often do in the world of diversity and inclusion, we allow assumptions to drive the narrative. Okay. Now let me role play here for just a moment. It's obvious that you and I share the same phenotype, but the reason why we might join the same affinity groups might be different. Might be very different. We've got to have the capacity to recognize that even though you might have shared traits with a group of individuals, doesn't necessarily mean, colleagues, that you joined for the same reason. We call that, when it's done wrong, co-opting the experience. And as long as you can keep that at bay, the organizations generally have an opportunity to survive. I mean, if you and I just called out some of our demographics, I mean, I'm from the Midwest. Where did you grow up?
I'm military brat all over.
So all over? Okay, so that's dimension number one. You have a son, you said earlier?
I have a son.
I have a son, so we have something in common. Didn't take me that long to get there. But now, so I only call on this because there's a difference between relations and intra-relations. We can't necessarily conflate those two. They're different things. When it works well and when participation thrives, not participation in number, but quality, there's a sense of authenticity. And I'm beating the drum here because it's important. Authenticity really matters for the long-range implications of groups forming and surviving.
I feel that the DCRI has promoted a grandstand, because one thing it is doing that I see is the mind works best when it's open. I took a course with Rick Warren. So it's forcing people to get out of the mindset. You know, and I think fear is the driving force, because that which is unknown, we tend to shy away from it, but it is allowing us to really, and I think it should become mandatory. It should not be an option. I wrote that down on a survey. You not, just like you have to do certain credentials to get a job at Duke, it needs to be mandatory. Because when you speak of diversity, another thought that comes to my mind, diversity does not necessarily mean that I agree with you in everything. Now, I haven't heard anything I disagreed with today, but it does not mean I have to agree with you. But be open-minded enough to see the difference, to appreciate that. And I think that needs to be clear with people. They might shy away from some of these because I just don't agree with such and such. So I just won't even go. I won't get involved or to open up the mind to see. So we stay locked in our world. But not only will we educate ourselves in the workforce, then we take this knowledge that we gain and it becomes a part of every facet of life. Then it chips away when you look at it on the world stand of all that's going on. It chips it away because now you're more informed that I will take the initiative to make a difference. So I'm a promoter of all of this. You know, I try to attend as many as I can. I just believe in people. I've done work at the jail from '94 up to maybe 3 years ago. I learned a lot in that, of the stereotyping. Everybody that's in jail is not the vagabond or the bad person. They made wrong choices that led. So all of this is just food for me, because I realize that, you know, we got a long ways to go. We've come a long ways, but still we got some room to go. But I'm excited because when I'm talking, I often use do in my conversation that not only do we recognize that there are some problems, platforms are being provided. It's not enough to know that there's a problem, but what are you doing to correct it? And this is what I see. I'm gonna be quiet now because I'm running.
That was beautifully stated. Thank you. Thank you.
We're kind of coming up on the end of our hour, but if you have questions or some comments, please just stick around. You all, I'm speaking for you. You'll be okay with that, right? Okay.
I'm curious about what are the next steps?
Yes, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we're going to have some groups that'll start meeting, and just watch Pulse, read Pulse, and please check out the diversity website and see what's happening there. It'll be there too, and you will see where these meetings will be open to everyone. So if you see a meeting for the women's group, the women's ERG, anybody, come, show up, and we're going to kick it off. Sarah, were you in the original Pride meeting? You were. So, and Sarah could probably share with that. The first meeting is kind of like you're getting to know each other, and that's how the space became authentic, and that's how people became very comfortable being in that space. They were in the room because they were passionate about what Pride was going to be, and really quickly it came together, and like-minded people out to do really great things were in that space, and they put everything else aside and were in the room with the same goals in mind. So we're going to start it the same way, and I tell the Pride group all the time, I hope the groups that follow are as fantastic as that group has been, because they just hit the ground running and have, as Pam said, have done some really wonderful things. So just watch the internet for the announcements, come to the meetings, and we'll just get it rolling.
Mind if I should share one other
Sure.
quick process thing while the group is still together? So there are two things that I think that lend to this authentic nature quickly. One is that there's a reason why in kindergarten our teachers had ground rules. Right? There's something about the human soul that really responds well to a standard. And so a standard of behavior, of engagement within an affinity group is important. Let me give you an example. One ground rule that I think has stood the test of time is when in authentic conversation, direct your comments at statements and not people, because it's never personal, or shouldn't be personal, right? You kind of be able to read that. Process, very important. Second is in the formation stage, it's always wise to don't start off with the most heaviest issue, right? So by that I mean, everybody wants to talk about race, but I meet few people who are prepared to talk about race, right? So think about things in which, in the formation of the new groups, get off the ground in such a way that you build momentum. There's nothing wrong, as my grandmother would say, in starting at A, knowing that you have a while to get to B, C, D, E, F. This is strictly process oriented, such that we understand that it's not as hard as we may think, but there's some tools you can use to make it feel like I'm a part of a community really, really fast.
And just to dovetail on that, I'm really going back to your comment about the hour and a half. You said, we only have an hour and a half to meet every month. And of course, we would want more time. But again, I think that the challenge, as I'm listening to you talk about your work that you've been doing, things can change in a moment. Things can change in an instant. And so really just being able to maximize that time that you have and think about how you really want to use that. Because we always want more time as we're energized and engaged to do the work. But also, just when I think about some of the conversations that I've had and some of the progress, things can just kind of turn, and someone can say something or share something with me that can really have a lifelong impact. So just kind of think about both of those things.